The Tom Woods Show, episode 819.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
To all my young listeners, you want to stand out from your peers? Then don't do what they do. Join Praxis, get real on-the-job experience and a real job. Be entrepreneurial. Get all the details at tomwoods.com/praxis. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. I have had, over the past 6 months, at least several professors as guests who have, and probably actually the past 2 months, come to think of it, who've had one run-in or another with the campus thought police, and we've talked about what happened and how they dealt with it. And I find these human interest stories quite interesting and important. But today I want to talk to somebody who's not a professor, but who nevertheless is seeing the situation up close. So we're bringing back Tom Cicada, who's been on in the past. Tom is president of the Bucknell College Libertarians. He also writes about social justice and libertarian issues for Breitbart News. And I thought I would get his thoughts on what we ought to be doing and what he's seeing and good questions like that. Tom, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me back.
I don't know what we're going to talk about here. I know what we're going to talk about, but I don't know the specifics. I'm just having you on, and you're young, and you're on the spot, and you're observing what's going on a college campus, and you're tuned into what's going on campuses in general. Obviously, you have a major connection with Milo Yiannopoulos, who knows a little bit about what's going on the campuses. So I wanted to have somebody on I could talk to about what we really ought to do. I've had a number of episodes with professors. I've talked to Jordan Peterson. I've talked to people who are less well-known but who have gone through ordeals no less harrowing, like Anthony Esselin at Providence College. I've talked to Michael Rechtenwald at NYU. So I've had some really interesting people I've talked to. And some of these people have fought back. Peterson has fought back. Rechtenwald actually got a promotion from assistant professor to full professor. So it is possible to win, but I haven't really gotten a general strategy of what do we do? How do we respond? How should people who are against what the social justice warriors are doing respond? What's a good strategy other than writing articles about how crazy these people are? Is there something more systematic, more effective that we can be doing? So I thought I would talk to you, given that you're sort of in the thick of it.
So the thing that I suggest, I got the chance to speak down at David Horowitz's Restoration Weekend. I was in early November, and I was speaking to a room of older conservatives, and I guess I tasked myself with how am I going to explain what is a social justice warrior? What is the new left on college campuses? So I was trying to put it into a quick, what is social justice? I was trying to just define it for myself briefly and succinctly. And what I came up with was what it really boils down to, I think, in my experience, it's an ideology that suggests that society is broken down into two classes. The oppressed and the oppressors, and you're either in one of these two categories, and that's the way they view everything. Every minor social interaction we talk about. I'm sure you've talked about microaggressions on the show. Minor social interactions. Everything is judged through that sociological lens of oppressor and oppressed. So if you're on a college campus and you are in the majority, or if you're a white male, you're an oppressor. You're kind of like I also like to use the words predator and prey, instead. So you're a predator. If you're a white male, doesn't matter what really who you are. You're a predator, and it's kind of like this 4-year anti-white, anti-male, anti-heterosexual guilt trip, because you're constantly being told that you're kind of responsible for some of the worst aspects of society. So engaging with that and engaging with where they're coming from is the first step in fighting back. Really, I know a lot of people would choose it. We're just going to demonize them off the bat, and they're crazy, and a lot of them are crazy, and it's radical. But it's really important to really get inside their heads and think about where they're coming from. I listened to the show, one of the more previous episodes with Cassie J, and she did that Red Pill documentary, and that's fascinating to me because there are some legitimate, as she brought up, men's right issues that go completely ignored, and not accidentally ignored, intentionally ignored, because because men are predators. They're predators in the social justice worldview. So their issues aren't relevant. So really, really thinking about it is the first step. That's really the first thing you have to do if you're going to take on these people.
All right. So give me an example, if not drawn from real life, then at least how you might want that kind of strategy to proceed. What would be some way, some in that we could get with people like this to get them talking and get them thinking? Now, personally, I am skeptical of that approach. I'll just tell you right off the bat. These don't strike me by and large as people who want to have rational discussions. They don't believe you even have a point of view. They're not interested in sitting down with a Trump supporter to figure out, I wonder what would make somebody vote this way. It's all racism, racism, racism. Everything's racism. You can't even talk rationally about anything. But I'll leave that aside for a minute. I'll try and be a good sport here. What would you suggest as an entry point?
Well, it's a little bit easier if you're like I'm most of this, and in my circle it's mostly conservatives. But if you're a young libertarian and you can kind of find common ground with someone on the social justice left, let's say you hop in on gay marriage or decriminalizing drugs, something like that, somewhere you can find common ground. I am unlike a lot of my peers in that I believe I don't think, mocking them, making fun of them is all that successful, even though sometimes it's necessary to make fun of people who are crazy and ridiculous. I think if you can kill them with kindness and try to find some common ground, that to me is when I found you can maybe break through to some of these radical social justice warriors and try to work with them a little bit. But it's it's a very difficult thing to do because to them you're the devil. Like if you don't follow the progressive orthodoxy to a T, you're you're everything that's wrong with society. So it's a big commitment to try to be kind to these people, to really try to find common ground with them, because they're not going to like you. It's part of the way they operate, whether they're doing it intentionally or not. Demonizing the people they disagree with is part of the strategy. I think it's part of. Someone decided at some point that, and people, it's like a cliche now to suggest that Saul Alinsky was the person who did it, but demonizing the people you disagree with, suggesting they're of a lower moral character, is part of the strategy, I think. So that makes it more difficult. But like I said, if you understand these things going in, it becomes a little bit easier.
All right. Are you observing any of this at Bucknell where you are?
Well, Bucknell is a small liberal arts school, so it is tainted by some of these things. And the thing that I always say is that the radicals on the left are far more mainstream and influential than the radicals on the right, I think. And people have fought me on that one, but I genuinely believe that, because I think the social justice left is a minority even on the radical college campuses or the very progressive college campuses. The problem is that they're very influential. Like they're very influential. Their strategies work. They have resources. They have connections with certain faculty members. They have a lot of pull. The media will always give them attention. Their issues are, So when they do the trigger warning stuff, when they do the microaggression stuff, the administration is usually sympathetic to the things that the most radical campus leftists want, which is tough. That makes it a little bit more difficult. But that's also a good thing, because I don't like to overblow it. And people say, is this, when you see these crazy stories, we read these crazy headlines about, one of my favorites from 2016 was when the kids at Emory had a meltdown because somebody wrote Trump 2016 in chalk on the sidewalk. That was one of my favorite stories. I think it would be unfair to suggest that that's all liberals on college campuses. I think it's a minority. Unfortunately, when those students act out that way, in a lot of cases, the administrations don't put their foot down. They kind of cave and give in to the demands of the loud and vocal minority. We saw what happened here's a perfect example. What happened at the University of Missouri last year, where we had these crazy protests in response to a couple of racial incidents, some of which I think were legitimate, others of which turned out to be hoaxes. That small group of students, that's small relative to the size of the University of Missouri, had an incredible amount of influence and actually really damaged the enrollment at the University of Missouri because of all of the press, all of the controversial press that the university received as a result. But that's the perfect example, because that was probably a protest group of maybe 100 students at a huge state university. But they shook that place to its core, for better or for worse, and really changed everything about the University of Missouri. That was everything that was going on at University of Missouri was their protest. A small group of radical students with radical ideologies on race and radical ideologies on gender, and they change everything. So I think understanding the scale, the scale of the amount of these people is also important too, because your average college Democrats president is not I would say not a social justice warrior. I've met a lot of college Democrats who are not social justice warriors, and those are the ones we should be praising. We should go out of our way as conservatives and libertarians to say these are the good ones.
Well, Tom, you have worked closely with Milo, who is known for being provocative on college campuses, and he's not known for saying, "Let me sit down and try and think about what might be motivating the people who are against me."
Yeah.
That's not what he's known for. He's known for being confrontational, in your face, take no prisoners. So do you think he's doing it wrong?
No, well, you know what? I get that a lot because I go out with the let's try to be friends attitude. And people will say, how could you possibly have that attitude when your boss, I co-hosted when I was co-hosting the podcast. We were partners on the podcast. How could you work with Milo and also have the let's be friends with the social justice warriors attitude? I think you can have both, and here's why. I think the reason, the purpose Milo serves is that he comes to these campuses, which the social justice warriors, the small groups of they bully everybody into kind of like omission and silence. And he comes in and he just breaks he completely destroys the environment and says, if you're a conservative or libertarian, it's okay to fight back against it. He goes so far and he's so provocative that I think the conversations that I want to have, these friendly conversations where you find middle ground, can happen as a result of him coming and kind of swaying, changing getting rid of the imbalances in the ideological discussions on campuses. He comes in and says, it's incredible to me how many students I've spoken with who say, I wasn't going to speak up on my college campus until Milo came and kind of told me that it was okay. Like, by his outrageous behavior, by his provocative performance at my university, he opened a window for conservative libertarian students to finally say things. Now, I don't think it would be productive if every student who saw Milo decided to behave like him in all of their interactions with social justice warriors. I hope that he is a catalyst, and I think he has been in a lot of ways. It certainly was for me when I brought him to my university. I had a lot of really calm, genuine one-on-ones with people because of the window that he opened for discussion. And I don't think that window would have been opened if he wasn't so provocative.
All right, so there are different sorts of approaches that we might take that would pass the Cicada test.
Yes.
All right. So I'm just looking back on 2016, where it seemed like it just either it got worse or we were noticing it more, because we had, was it 2016 or 2015 where we had the Halloween costumes, I think, was back in 2015.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of 2016, partly because of Milo provoking these people by giving a speech, that doesn't take much to get these people going, we got videos of people screaming and stomping their feet. So this really, and not only that, of course, then the election of Donald Trump made everybody go berserk. So it was a crazy year, and it seems to me so crazy. It's so utterly indefensible and bizarre that it makes it difficult for me to imagine that I could sit down across a table from somebody like this and talk things out, because when they would have speakers come, I would maybe roll my eyes, but I can't imagine disrupting it or trying to get the administration to cancel it, even though most of the speakers who come to a college campus are going to be quite congenial from their point of view. One competing voice comes and they have to shut that down. I don't see how I have common ground with somebody like that.
I think social justice did explode in the last 2 years. And I think, like you said, the first times we really noticed it was that incident at Yale over the Halloween costumes. That was one of the big turning points where we were going, okay, this is a problem. This is a problem. And all of this brought me back to something I noticed when I was much, much younger. And like you said, I think conservative and libertarian college students think that progressives and liberals, they might think they're stupid or silly. Or maybe, and sometimes, maybe something worse than that. But it's basically that they think they're wrong. And I noticed this a lot when I was young. I think it was in middle school. I kind of noticed, and I think I read about it much later in Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell wrote a lot about what he called like the people who are the anointed. How they have this sense of, the liberals have this sense of moral superiority. And this was just an explosion of that in these past 2 years. The Halloween costume incident was the perfect example. You had this incident where somebody, that these professors stood up for students' rights to wear what could be considered ethnically or culturally offensive Halloween costumes. It was a very gray area. We didn't really know. I think you could have a reasonable argument for both sides of that incident. But with just the most unbelievable righteous indignation, a student screamed at one of the headmasters at Yale, something that I don't think would have been possible 30 years ago because of I just don't think it would have been possible for a student to have that kind of attitude towards a professor or an administrator. But it stemmed from this social justice worldview that and I think that I'm almost positive Professor Christakis is a liberal, but by defending students' right to wear culturally offensive Halloween costumes, he became a predator. He became an oppressor, and because of that, this female student was justified in cursing him off in front of everybody on one of the campus's main quads. It was unbelievable. So the past 2 years have been wild. I hope 2017 is the year this stuff dies, but I can't say that I believe that's going to happen.
Some people say it's silly to be worried about this. These are just campus antics and big deal. But what concerns me about it isn't so much the occasional disrupted lecture as it is the thought that someday some of these people might actually be in charge of something. And they're going to take this closed-minded point of view wherever they go. And that could be on the bench. That could be at other levels of government. And that's what concerns me, that these are people, some of them are coming from privileged backgrounds. It's funny, they're railing against privilege, and half of them are at Ivy League schools. And therefore, they could well be in a position to influence the way our lives are actually lived, not just the texture of life on a college campus. That's what alarms me about them, and that's why my response to it is so visceral, which is smash, hit back, ridicule. Take this direct kind of approach, right for the jugular.
Well, yeah, I knew, and I think a lot of people knew, and that's why they were so eager to vote for Trump. Is they knew that Trump was going to send the social justice warriors into a tizzy, and he did. And I don't know if that was the best thing. I mean, the reactions to the elections were unbelievable, but between walkouts and the protests and we had at Bucknell there was a wall, a brick wall that the students put up in the student center where students expressed how they were the stuff, like the crazy stuff. I mean, Cassie J would love this. Just women writing about how they felt now that Trump was the president-elect. They felt like it was America was unsafe, which is crazy considering the fact that it's pretty obvious that men are more often victims of violent crime than women, but women are all of a sudden very afraid to walk around this country, despite the fact that men are often more. But anyway, to go back to your question about, is this just a small group of people, or are they actually going to cross into the mainstream, or are they our future societal leaders? And yeah, I really genuinely believe this strand, because they're influential in their small numbers now. I mean, we see a crossover. I don't know if you know who Lena Dunham is. She's a fan favorite of the conservative and libertarian groups to rip on.
Right.
She made a little artistic skit, kind of like this little art poem online with her father that came out a couple weeks ago, and it was basically the celebration of the end of the white race, suggesting because white men are starting to become a minority as America becomes more diverse. And it was her and her father talking about how white men have ruined everything and how white men are so horrible. These horrible oppressors, and it's a good thing that they're becoming a minority. It's a good thing that they're heading towards extinction. So that's some of this radical race ideology gone mainstream. And that people, I know she's starting to rub even people on the left the wrong way, but she's very influential. She had a long-running HBO television show. She's got big social media accounts, and a lot of people really admire her. So to see that kind of radicalism, that kind of, collectivist thing from somebody as influential as her is concerning for the future. But there's certain things. One of the things I always say is this, because of this collectivist attitude towards white now, that's radical. That's a big part of it, of the issue, of this radical race ideology. I say it's crazy because you have you have these feminists on college campuses, like you said, who are either at Ivy League schools or from affluent upbringings, and they're telling white males from poor and broken neighborhoods to go check their male privilege, and it's because of stuff like this that, LeBron James's children will enjoy a lower university admission standard than, a poor white Cleveland teenager. So it's this the race stuff taken way too far, and all of a sudden it's chaos. And I think stuff, there's certain places where you're seeing the social justice warrior stuff go into the mainstream. Lena Dunham's an example of that. In some ways, Amy Schumer is an example of that. It's fun to rip on these people, but I think in a more serious way, I think it's concerning.
On the other hand, we have social media. We have all these different avenues that we didn't have before, where we can speak our own minds about what the typical Hollywood idiot is saying. I mean, Hollywood figures have had inane things to say. This is an old tradition going back many decades. Whatever the topic is, it doesn't matter if they know anything about it. In fact, I think if Ted Danson was to be believed, I think the world was supposed to have ended in the year 2000. I mean, right? We were supposed to either be flooded or starved to death, or I forget which one he was latching onto. And yet here we are. And I don't recall any apologies from Ted Danson, or maybe next time I'll try to stick to things I know a little bit more about, or I won't just think that I'm entitled to an opinion because I'm a celebrity. You don't really get a whole lot of examination of self from these folks. You just get a lot more of the same over and over and over. But we can respond. And yeah, my Twitter account doesn't have as many followers as Ted Danson's, but when 500,000 people are ridiculing the guy, well, that does add up. That is something.
Well, we just had the I didn't mean to cut you off. We just had that video where Martin Sheen and some other celebrities were encouraging the electors to not vote for Trump. That was interesting. I mean, that was interesting too, because it was a group of celebrities who, it was nice to say. I think Mark Wahlberg came out a couple weeks ago and said maybe the celebrities shouldn't be so vocal on politics. I think he said something like, they live in this tiny little bubble. They're very, very privileged, I think is what he said. And their perspective isn't relevant to the majority of Americans, and they should stop thinking that it is.
Well, now, what year are you in school?
I have one more semester. I just got my LSAT back, so I'm working on the law school applications, but hoping still to keep. I mean, I love doing the social justice stuff with Breitbart. They've given me an incredible opportunity to explore this stuff in depth and really follow these stories. But one more semester.
What kind of advice would you give to a kid who's entering college, who maybe comes from a small town, hasn't really had any direct interaction with the whole social justice warrior issue, seen a few YouTube videos, but that's it? What kind of advice do you give that person who, let's say, has some right-of-center views and yet might wind up being intimidated by these people? What do you say?
I think you either have to, and I might even regret suggesting, you either have to go all out like I did and just completely own it, or you have to just completely conceal it and get your grades and get out. I think most people, Ben Shapiro, I think maybe I've heard you say it. I've become friendly. I spent the day in Brooklyn with Michael Malice, and I think he'd be of the kind to say just kind of go in and get your grades and maybe be provocative outside of the classroom. But it's not worth it. It's not worth it, especially in the classroom, to push these guys. And you're gonna have, like I did. I had a lot more fun and success in talking about this stuff and having influence with regards to this stuff outside of the classroom. And unfortunately, because of some of that success, it's carried back into people. I have a reputation now as a result. But if you want to, I would encourage students to, go to the school newspaper and balance it out, because a lot of school newspapers are very progressive. But there are school newspapers, they should allow you to write, editorials and do it there. But in the classroom, I think tell the professor what he or she wants to hear. Get your grades, and then graduate and use your new influence as a college graduate to speak out against stuff going on college campuses, or to influence the political landscape at that point.
Well, you're right about the student newspaper thing, because one thing you're accomplishing is you are reaching some of the other students on campus who are afraid to speak out because of the atmosphere of terror, and you're affirming them that they're not crazy, that maybe the behavior they're seeing in these other people might be described as crazy, but they're all right. That they don't have to feel scared or feel like they can't be who they want to be. Isn't this funny? I have to use their own language. You don't have to feel scared. You can be who you want to be. You know, that's how they portray themselves. But honestly, it's totally the other way around. Whoever thought on an American college campus today, I better not tell anybody I'm homosexual. I have, the whole campus will stop and hold a giant party for you. And there's no concern about that.
I've heard people say that it's more difficult to come out as a Republican or a libertarian in some ways on a college campus than coming out as a homosexual. And I don't doubt that for a second. I mean, nobody on the left will concede that to be true, but I think it's almost certainly true.
It's not. It's more than almost. I mean, there's no one's really. Nothing's going to happen. You'll be celebrated. But by writing these, a column that affirms what a lot of people on campus believe, you help them to keep their sanity as they get through the 4 years. And you may say, oh, you're just preaching to the choir. But, last I checked, the choir is part of the congregation and does need to be preached to. I've said this a lot. I don't know any church where the pastor says, all right, I'm going to dismiss the choir while I preach to the rest of you.
Right.
The choir needs to be preached to. And in this case, especially so. So definitely do that. And I agree with you about first of all, you shouldn't take a professor who you know to be a social justice warrior type. You're not going to learn anything from that person.
Right.
But you will find people who have a bias. That's a different question. But people who are social justice warriors, forget that. They're not scholars. Forget that. But professors who have a bias, well, pretty much you have to live with that. You're not going to win against the professor. And if you stand up in class and challenge the professor, basically a lot of the other students are just marking time. They're sitting there so that they can get their piece of paper after 4 years. And if you are keeping them past lunch, they're looking at their watches and they hate you. You are not accomplishing anything. You're not making them say, maybe I'll go look up the Mises Institute because of what this guy in class said. You're not accomplishing that. Do that through the student newspaper, and I think you'll get more traction.
Well, yeah, and the other thing I said down in Florida, and I always push this because it's so important, and I think it's important to spin things that aren't ideal in a positive way. If you're a conservative or libertarian student on a college campus and you're being inundated with all the progressive stuff, that it can be a good thing. It can, because I think you're going to come out of those 4 years with a much more well-rounded perspective on the world than any liberal students, because liberal students go into class and these professors who have their PhDs go in and they basically pat these students on the back. They're reaffirming everything they believe. But if you're a conservative libertarian, you're reading the conservative libertarian stuff on your own time, and at school you're getting the liberal and progressive stuff. So you're getting it all. So I think in that sense it can be a positive. Now the other thing, one other story that I like to tell, because this was mind-blowing. There was a professor at Bucknell in the economics department who, back in 2003, the Bucknell College Republicans was a huge club, and it still exists today, but it's much smaller. And they were interviewed for a big piece in the New York Times. That's how influential they were at the time. And there was an economics professor who was asked to comment on the rise of the College Republicans group at Bucknell, and he said something along the lines of, and it sounds crazy, but it's true. That he didn't like more conservative students in his classroom because it made other students more skeptical of what he was teaching. I think he said something like, it made other students more likely to believe that he was trying to indoctrinate them. But basically what it boiled down to, and I have since confronted him and confronted administrators about this sentiment that he suggested. He was basically suggesting that he didn't want his students to be skeptical of what he was preaching. And this guy is a Marxist. He teaches Marx. He teaches a lot of Marx. He didn't like the conservative students were making other students more skeptical of his lessons. And I think that's just mind-blowing, because I think skepticism is important no matter what your political beliefs are. Skepticism is important no matter if you're a PhD, econ professor. You always have to be skeptical. You always have to be questioning. You always have to be learning. And for him to have that attitude, I thought it was disgusting.
All right, more craziness still to come. But if you want to avoid some of the craziness you've been hearing so far, you might appreciate our sponsor today. Hey, everybody, if you're thinking that maybe 4 years of the kind of horror shows we've been discussing in this episode maybe aren't quite for you, then check out Praxis, Praxis, where you have an opportunity to apprentice with a startup and get a guaranteed job. Average starting salary for Praxis graduates, $55,000 a year. I recently had a chance to sit down with Praxis graduate Charles Porges. Charles, you're in the Praxis program right now. You're 18 years old. Tell me what you're doing.
I mean, so far it's been amazing. I have a full-time position at my business partner, Guild Quality, and my advisor in the Praxis Network has been tremendously valuable to my personal growth.
You're only 18 years old. I'm sure you know what a lot of other 18-year-olds are doing right now.
Yeah.
How do you feel like you have a leg up on them?
I mean, for one, I already have this kind of job experience, this sales job with full-time pay. I really just think I'm 5 or 6 years ahead of a lot of my peers.
And how you doing in the debt department?
0 debt.
Hey, how about that? Thanks a lot, Charles. Get all the details plus some bonus goodies when you check it out through tomwoods.com/praxis. Tom, tell me about your own personal experience. You're an outspoken person, and I bet some people at Bucknell know who you are. But you don't challenge professors in the classroom, but yet maybe some of the professors know who you are. Have you ever run into trouble with other students, with leaders of student groups, with the student newspaper, with professors at all?
Well, I guess the big incident that I have to mention, and I may have mentioned it the first time I came on, was that I was class president as a junior. I was the junior class president, and I was removed with about 8 or 9 days remaining in the semester, which would have been the end of my term. And it was revealed in the student newspaper later that the policy that I was removed for, the violation I was removed for, was a violation that 29 of the 60 student government senators had also committed. It was a policy that had been broken by almost 50% of the student government. So it was a big Breitbart. We brought it up on Breitbart. Some other websites picked it up. Because it seemed almost transparently that it was a very selective, it was a very transparently a blatant attempt to get rid of me, because I had Milo on campus that semester. I had Dinesh D'Souza. I had been writing provocative things about the university. I had been writing provocative things about campus liberals. And it seemed like that was kind of the ultimate punishment. Like that was just, we're going to get him back. We're going to put a mark on his record by removing him. It was kind of a mess. And I said, hey, this is silly because I'm supposed to be able to appeal a decision like this, but if I'm to appeal and it takes you guys a couple days, what is it? A symbolic reinstatement? You're going to reinstate me on the last day of the semester. I'll come back for 1 day. That doesn't really mean anything. So basically, you can't kick me out now, because even if I were to appeal, that's not a fair appeals process, because I would never come back to the position. They didn't like that argument, and they appealed. They did do the appeal, and they voted to kick me out permanently on one of the last days of the semester. So I can't say conclusively that was politically motivated, but it seemed like it was.
Okay. What do you draw from that? What do you conclude from that episode?
Well, one of the things I said, oh my God, if I was a trans student, that never would have happened. If I was, an African-American female, that never would have happened. The reason why I was pulled away, and it was kind of like an attendance. I had missed 3 or 4. I had hours of meetings every day as class president, hours constantly meeting. I had missed 3 or 4 meetings of maybe 75, 100 meetings that semester, because I had hosted. One of them was because I had hosted Milo, because I had hosted Dinesh, because I had hosted Steven Crowder. I was pulled away from meetings because I was hosting these events. If I had been hosting Melissa Harris Perry, who came to campus that semester, if I had been hosting Bill Nye the Science Guy, I just can't imagine a world where those would not have been overlooked absences. But what it told me is that they don't really care. Like they don't. It's like going after me because of my political beliefs. They didn't feel any guilt about that. Like it's like I said it kind of in the beginning of the show. It's all justified because of the predator versus prey, this predator versus prey worldview where I became like a super predator because of my associations with Milo and because of the work I was doing at Breitbart. At that point, I was not just a white male who was libertarian. I was a white libertarian male who worked for Breitbart and did a podcast with Milo Yiannopoulos. I was everything that they hated and more. So if anybody was going to be a target, it was going to be me, and they'll deny it until the end of times. But I wasn't surprised at that point. I had understand what they were about, and I hear stories like this. I mean, I know I don't know. It's probably going to come up at some point on your podcast. But the kidnapping yesterday, not to compare these two incidents at all, because they're obviously nothing alike, but these 4 African-American teenagers felt justified in torturing this young special needs white Trump supporter, I guess, because of this radical social justice worldview that made him the predator. He's a predator to them. It would be like, I'm trying to think of an animal comparison where a bunch of weaker animals corner one predator and attack him. Because even though there's no reason, this guy he's not a predator in any way. He's actually a special needs white guy. This radical social justice worldview justified for them the horrible treatment the horrible way that they treated him. And I know people are probably get a lot of criticism for suggesting that this social justice worldview inspired that, but I think it did.
No, and it obviously did. And beyond that, you could, again, all you have to do is imagine the situation in reverse. If it had been, I mean, look, it doesn't even require any imagination to imagine the situation in reverse and what would have been the response. And it would have been Trump inspired this hate, right? We all would have heard it. Trump inspired it. Whereas this is sort of, oh, well, sometimes kids make mistakes and who knows where they could have gotten these ideas. And it's all very inchoate and no one can figure it out. And everybody's scratching his head where this might have come from. Whereas there are all these alleged hate crimes that are all Trump's fault. And then it turns out most of them are fake, or they're, somebody said a thing like build the wall. They're not like, having your teeth kicked in, which is more of a hate crime than saying build the wall to somebody. I mean, really? And I'm reduced to now quoting Ann Coulter, who I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. I think she's better than she used to be. She used to be really good. Then she became a real GOP shill, and then she was bad. And now she's, I think, actually not so bad. I think a lot of the observations she makes are right. If these groups really felt like they were in fear of white Americans who at any moment, they're like ticking time bombs, at any moment might commit crimes, why aren't they moving away? Why don't they say, this is not a safe place for us? To the contrary, they're encouraging more people to move to the U.S. So actions speak louder than words. I don't believe them. I do not believe them when they say they are in fear. When I'm in fear, I run. And yet I don't see anybody doing that.
Well, that's the crazy thing. I mean, yeah, you're right. And the weird thing about this is that this is a very, and I know it's just one incident, and I think it shouldn't be taken too far. But this is a very interesting example because we're constantly beaten over the head, especially college students, with this idea that just white people have it all. We have it all going for us. You're born white. You're like this kid. He's born a white male. That's it. He's set. He's never going to have to really work for anything because of all of the privilege that he has. It's going to be wonderful. But this is a special needs, a young man with special needs who was tortured because of his identity, and it seems to be also his political beliefs. I can't for a second say, and I hate when people do stuff like this, but I can't listen to people like DeRay McKesson and Sean King and not think that they weren't inspired by some of their rhetoric. I mean, we have DeRay McKesson. I don't know if you follow him or have heard him speak. He's an influential Black Lives Matter leader. These are people that have gone to very influential universities like Yale and given very serious lectures about looting and why looting is morally justified and why destroying the business of somebody who's not even a part of an incident, like an innocent bystander, is okay because it's kind of like their suggestion is, oh well, you know what, the African Americans are so oppressed that they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to respond to all of this oppression. So this is the only way they know how to act out, and that's by burning down some Asian American's grocery store on the corner. It's very radical, and when they're out there, even giving the slightest of justifications for some of this stuff, I can't say that they're not responsible for incidents like the one yesterday. And hopefully yesterday's it. Hopefully stuff like this is the last of incidents like this. I hope.
Well, Tom, how do people follow what you're up to? Is it over at Breitbart? And if so, I guess I'll link over there.
Yeah, you can. I'll send you the link to my author page if you want to put that in the show notes. Or you can follow me at Tcicotta. That's TCICCOTTA on Twitter. And I have a Facebook page. It's all under Tommy John. That's my social media profile. But that's that. Yeah, Breitbart.com/Tom Cicada will get you there. I'll send you the link for that too. But thanks so much for having me on, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to do it, but I'm going to say something that's really embarrassing that I shouldn't say. But do you know? I feel stupid saying this, but I have to. I just have to say. Sometimes you have to say a stupid thing. There's an underwear company called Tommy John.
You know what? I know. I got my first pair of Tommy John underwear from Santa. Was very generous, and they are expensive, but they are nice.
Exactly,
they are nice underwear.
Yeah, and I actually have promoted them on the show, and at this point now, I basically don't wear anything else. Yeah, they are pricey, but at some point, you got to graduate from being in 5th grade. You know, the Fruit of the Loom that you wore, there's nothing wrong with them, but treat yourself to something vastly more comfortable. Well, anyway, so when I saw that you had tweeted and it said Tommy John, because I've been doing nothing but talking to people about how great this underwear is, so I saw Tommy John on your thing, and I thought, oh, they've recognized. I've been recognized by Tommy John for my love for their product. No, it was just you.
Well, that is my first and middle name, so it's not like I'm. It's also a very famous baseball player. The surgery is named after, so it's.
Yeah, no, I get that you're entitled to use it, and Tom, I'm glad to hear from you on Twitter at any time. I don't want you to stop doing that, but I thought, oh darn it, I thought it was my corporate hero, but
I didn't mean to disappoint.
That's quite all right. All right, thanks again, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Tom.
All right, listen, if you have not grabbed one of my free ebooks, grab it at tomsfreebooks.com. They give you a lot of ammunition to use, especially when you're cornered. People have tough questions for you. We've got some good, punchy answers in those books. So Tom's Free Books is where to go for that. Got some fun stuff coming up next week. I've got some good episodes lined up for you, starting with Don Boudreau on Monday for episode 820. But next weekend, I don't know what I can't do. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it should be episode 825. Will be a bonus episode with Ben Settle, whom I've had on before. And I'll tell you something. I love this guy. And if you're not interested in email copywriting, and I don't mean copywriting like making things subject to copyright, I mean writing email copy, then maybe you won't be interested in this episode. But I think you will anyway, because Ben is just one of the, I don't know, he's one of the biggest badasses in the world in just his business approach, his style, his writing, his attitude, his podcast, everything about him. I am having him on mainly because I want to be able to have a conversation with him and I don't want to bother him. But if I have him on the show, I get to talk to him for half an hour. And you guys can listen in. Anyway, he has a great newsletter that I get. There's no affiliate program with his newsletter. I don't earn anything promoting Ben Settle. I just like talking to Ben Settle. I have learned a lot from Ben. I have earned a fortune thanks to Ben's methods, and I want to share this guy's knowledge with you. So that's coming up as a bonus episode 825. So thanks for listening. Use this weekend to grab a free ebook. Why not, right? Sit outside. Well, I'm living in Florida. It's probably in January. You don't want to sit outside. Sit wherever your comfortable reading chair is and check out one of the books at tomsfreebooks.com. See you next week.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.